Flared skirts were introduced around 1892 and grew to their widest extent around 1895 and gained such names as the fan, the bell, or the umbrella skirt due to their width. At the same time, the growth of the leg of mutton sleeve balanced the skirt increase. Skirt and blouse separates continued to be popular even after the Victorian and Edwardian period. These versatile wardrobe staples were worn for both casual and semi-dressy occasions. The Edwardian skirt fluctuated several times over the era. The 1890s started out strong with a very flared A-line skirt, but soon after gave way to the more narrower trumpet skirt. The trumpet skirt was flat-fronted, being comprised of 5 to 7 gores, fit closely about the hips to the knee, then flared out around the knees to the hem, with a train attached at the back for ease of walking. Edwardian skirts can be divided into 3 categories: lined or walking, draped, or housemaid's skirts, which were usually made from a print, may or may not have been gored, and were usually never lined. A well-fitted skirt should hang evenly around the bottom, fall outward so they don't cling to the feet, and with seams appearing to fall straight downward from the waist. They should fit snugly around the hips without strain, but sufficient room for the figure to move or bend easily. Late Victorian and early Edwardian skirts were cut with gores, and the purpose is twofold: to reduce the weight of the skirt by removing excess material from the waist, and to improve the appearance and comfort by decreasing the fullness at the hips and waist, but increasing the fullness at the hem. Skirt hems should never be less than 2.5 yards around the hem, but could be as much as 5. The pattern I used from Truly Victorian is TV E21, the 1903 trumpet skirt, a 7-gore flared hem skirt. This type of skirt was very popular from 1899 to 1905. This skirt is fitted over the hips and is moderately slim to just a little bit above the knee, then flares out dramatically at the hem. The back can be fitted in the habit style with a 6-inch sweep, or in round length with box pleat. The closure is at the center back and has a separate skirt lining or foundational skirt with a ruffle at the hem to help support the flare. But the style I chose was the sweep length with box pleat. The reason I didn't choose Truly Victorian's very popular TV 291, which a lot of creative YouTubers have done, is because the walking skirt is late Victorian and the trumpet skirt is early Edwardian. But I'm basically treating this skirt like a walking skirt. I also feel as though there are so many people that have done the 291 walking skirt pattern already, and I didn't just want to be another fish in the bucket. Not that there's anything wrong with following schools of fish. After all, I am essentially making a walking skirt to put into a video to post onto YouTube. Skirts during this time were typically lined with silk, linenette, alpaca, or tarlatan. Tarlatan is a thin, starched, open weave muslin used for stiffening evening gowns, but can also be used for skirts in general. But I won't be using tarlatan to stiffen my skirt, for I want to be able to toss it into the laundry whenever it gets dirty. Tarlatan is stiffened with starch, which will easily wash out when subjected to water, and then you'll just be left with a loose cotton gauze. Walking skirts are the most popular of all, partly because they were almost always gored, were simple to make, and were easy to wear. Skirt hems were typically stiffened with horsehair braid or a hair canvas. For my skirt, the reason I'm not using a lining is because of the cotton twill I used is fairly stable, but I still want to reinforce the hem for 2 reasons. With a 6-inch hem braid used as a stiffener and make the hem of the skirt stand out, and with a hem facing to cover the modern and unsightly hem braid. For the Edwardian trumpet skirt, I cut 2 of center back, 1 cut on the fold for the center front, 2 of the side backs, and 2 side fronts. For the skirt placket, I cut 4 rectangles, roughly 4 inches by 10 inches. For the waistband, I cut out several pieces of 3-inch wide fabric and sewed enough pieces together to fit around my corseted waist, with a few extra inches to spare, which will create the narrow waistband. For my mock-up, I graded up the pattern to roughly my size, but didn't pay too close attention to the fit, as I had planned to do that after most of the construction was done. I did a quick and dirty fitting and realized that the waist of the skirt was too large, but I needed to finish the back placket opening in order to fit the waist properly. I know it seems as though I've finished most of this skirt off camera, and basically I have, only because I wasn't interested in boring you with sewing some straight seams, which I felled all seams but the center back, which I left open. After sewing the rectangular placket pieces together on 3 sides, cut the corners, turned and pressed the pieces right side out. Then sewed a 1/2 inch away from the raw edge and sewed only through 1 layer of the fabric. This line is just a guideline for the placement of the eyes side of the closure. I put a book beneath the placket because I realized that the arm of the couch was the exact same color as my project. And I sewed the eyes on, keeping the smaller attaching loops on the seam allowance side of the placket. I sewed a total of 6 eyes on this side of the placket. I pinned the placket right sides together to the left-hand side of the skirt opening, only pinning through 1 layer of the placket fabric. Then sew the placket on just slightly to the right of my previous placement line that I used to sew on the eyes. The idea is to sew over the eyes in such a way that they stick out of the seam when the placket is finished. When it came to sewing over the eyes, just like sewing over pins, there was a high probability that I was going to break the needle. I didn't really want tiny bits of metal to fling up into my face, so I found it was less scary to manually turn the wheel of my sewing machine by hand, easing the needle over the eyes. Depending on the design of the skirt, the placket may be placed on any seam, but one of the many reasons why plackets may gape or be ill-fitting is because of the hook and eye placement. If they are placed too far apart and the skirt strains any, it will gape. The length of the skirt placket needs only to be as long as necessary to carry the skirt over the hips without strain or tear. 10 to 12 inches at most, but the shorter the placket, the better. The underlap with the eyes is applied to the left-hand side, the overlap with the hooks on the right, but you could also do the reverse if you are left-hand dominant. I can't tell you how many times I read and reread the pattern directions, or went to YouTube to try and find detailed demonstrations, or Googled pictures laminating how the plackets were actually done. There are tons of awesome videos done by extremely skilled costumers on making skirts just like the one I'm attempting, but for some reason they tend to gloss over the process of installing the placket, so perhaps plackets aren't as difficult as I'm assuming. Kat from Kat's Costumery has an excellent video on installing plackets and shows examples of different types from her personal collection. But even after watching her video numerous times, I still couldn't get it. So I won't be doing the placket the truly Victorian way, the costumer way, or Kat's way. We will be doing it my way. This journey we are about to venture forth may get rather bumpy. I ironed open the seam of the placket, making sure that the eyes were pointing to the edge of the placket. I trimmed down the seam allowance, then folded the edge of the placket over the raw seam and pinned, then slip stitched it into place. Later, I removed this basting stitch. This clip is to illustrate in better detail how I finished the placket. The center back of the skirt is still unsewn, but you can see where I folded back the hook side of the placket to the back of the skirt and felled it down to keep it in place. When it came time to cutting the facing, I wasn't going to be able to use the paper pattern as a template. Of course, I could have used the mock-up as a template, but I decided to lay the floral fabric flat on the hem of the skirt and cut it to the curved shape that I needed. I first cut it at the curved raw edge of the skirt, then measured up 7 inches from the raw edge for the height of my facing, making the facing 1 inch taller than the hem braid. I used this cute floral fabric that I found very inexpensively at a thrift shop, and thought it would give the skirt a fun pop of color since it's rather plain. After doing some clever pattern maneuvering to get the really flared skirts cut from the cotton twill, I probably don't need to tell you that I had run out of fabric for this skirt and couldn't cut the facing out of the twill cotton. I only had enough to squeeze out just enough fabric for the waistband. It seems to be a running theme with most of my projects, even though I always buy more fabric than what was prescribed on the pattern. After seaming the facing pieces together, I laid it right sides together on the raw edge of the hem. I still need to sew the center back of the skirt, which is the reason I left the allowance on the hem extra long. And then I laid this unruly snake, hem braid, on top of the facing, pinning it into place. This hem braid was the goofiest stuff I have ever worked with. If you're unfamiliar with hem braid, it's this slithery, slinky stuff. Horsehair, or hem braid, as I call it, is a springy, loosely woven crinoline knitting made from polyester, historically made from horsehair. It has many different uses, but a common one is to hem dresses and skirts with it. It stabilizes the hem and gives it structure and fullness. Just what I need. This certainly isn't historically accurate, but stiffening the hem of the skirt certainly is, so perhaps my take on it is a bit historically inspired and vegan friendly. This loose thread woven into the top of the hem braid is designed to pull the braid taut. When the hem braid is flipped to the wrong side of the skirt, the top edge will need to be drawn slightly tighter to account for the smaller circumference. Hence, the skirt narrows more towards the knees, geometry stuff. I sewed the right side of the placket on the same way as the left. Finished the raw edge, then turned back the placket to the inside of the skirt. The reason for this is to give a sturdy foundation for the hooks to be mounted. For the hooks, I sewed them on according to the placement of the eyes on the left side of the placket opening. Now that the placket is finished, I can work on the pleats on both sides of the placket opening. While there are pleats and fold indications on the paper pattern, I really didn't go by what they said. I folded and arranged them how I thought they looked nice. I was sure to measure the pleats on the already pleated side and try to recreate them on the side you see here. I basted the pleats 2 or so inches down from the raw edge of the waist, just to keep them in place, but this step isn't necessary. If the stitching shows or is unsightly, I'll remove them. The back seam couldn't have been sewn a moment too soon. I sewed it with a 1/2 inch allowance, hoping that this time I'll be able to flat fell that chunky little seam with relative ease. After flipping the facing to the inside of the skirt, I temporarily pinned it out of the way as I rolled the fabric into place with my fingers. I pressed the hem with the iron on a low synthetic setting. Remember, this hem braid is plastic, and I don't want it to melt. To secure the top of the facing, the skirt must be flat. It's imperative that the skirt is laid flat, or else the fabric will be bubbly and warped. You remember that thread I told you about? Well, I gently tug on it to tighten the curve of the hem braid to the tighter circumference of the skirt, and continue tugging on it every so often as I work to pin the facing. The floral facing won't need as much adjusting because remember, its top edge is cut on a curve, so I just tuck it behind the hem braid. I'm not gonna lie, this part was quite fiddly and time-consuming, but the end result will be well worth it. I realize you can't see it very well because of the busy floral print, but I ended up having to take in a little dart in the facing simply because I couldn't get it to lay as flat as I wanted. After pinning the entire facing, I slip stitched the facing into place using tiny stitches as possible. As I sewed the facing in place, I realized the lining would have come in handy, because if I had sewn the facing to the lining, my stitching wouldn't have been so visible on the outside of the skirt. After I did a last quick fitting, I sewed the skirt waistband and attached the skirt hooks. But if you know anything about me, then you know I felt an overwhelming desire to complicate this skirt and add at least a bit of decoration to it, because it was rather plain. So Silky helped me pin on some of this goldish tan velvet ribbon trim. At first I wasn't very happy with the color of the velvet ribbon, but couldn't find one even closer to the chocolatey brown color of the skirt. I have since changed my mind, and I'm really liking the fact that the ribbon isn't the same color as the skirt, for I think it would have blended in too much. I could always change it out for something else if I decided I don't like it after all. Now that I've seen the skirt on over the petticoat, I may need to sew in a few extra tucks into the petticoat to take up even more length. I really don't want it peeking out from under the skirt as I'm walking. Apparently, minor miscalculations. The waistband turned out quite snug. While I don't think it looks bad, it does ride a bit too high. Or the petticoat beneath is adding bulk to the waist area, which I can't wear it lower due to the length. I'm also not wearing my corset cover, which will add even more bulk to the waist area, and I'm also not wearing a shirtwaist, which will be tucked in, so I will have to make some small adjustments to the waist to accommodate the added layers. Overall, this project was simple to make, and I'm extremely happy with the way it looks. And I have to say, the cut, the shape, and the way it fits on the body is extremely flattering. As for the velvet trim, I am happy with the way it looks, but I decided to sew on only one row, just for the sake of keeping it simple. Not to mention it was extremely tedious to sew it on all by hand, and in such a way that the stitching hardly shows. If at a later time I'm feeling like doing some labor-intensive hand sewing, I may sew on more rows. At the very back of the skirt, to cover up the start and stop of the ribbon end, I attached a small flat bow for decoration. You'll notice that I neglected to put any pockets in this skirt. Some walking skirts can have some not so hidden inseam pockets. Others can have a rather deep or spacious pocket cleverly hidden in the back of the skirt where the pleats overlap. Alas, I didn't manage to insert any pockets into this project, but please stick around for my future Edwardian videos where I come up with an alternative solution to remedy this rather disappointing feature. And if you're hunting around for a clue, you may want to check out my Instagram. I did make a post about it a few weeks ago. Were worn for semi-casual and dressy. Yes. Okay. Did you want to be in it? Okay. Did you want to be in it? Like, what? Skirt. These versatile, is it versatile or versatile? Volatile or volatile? Volatile? Okay.